Imagine you found a ring. Not a valuable ring, not a beautiful ring, a plain, unremarkable ring that you would not look at twice in a jewelry store. But someone tells you or you discover by accident that this ring has a property unlike anything that has ever existed. When you turn the setting inward toward your palm, you become invisible. Not metaphorically invisible, actually invisible. No camera can see you, no sensor can detect you, no person in any room you enter knows you are there. You can walk into any building, take anything, hear any conversation, do anything to anyone, and when you turn the setting back, you return to your normal life without a trace. Nobody will ever know. Nobody can ever know. What do you do? Take a moment with that. Not the answer you would give out loud, in front of other people, where the answer costs you nothing because you are being watched. The real answer. The one that surfaces in the silence before your mind starts constructing the version of yourself you prefer to present to the world. Because here is the thing about that question. Most people, when they sit with it honestly, find something they did not expect to find. They find that the answer is not as clean as they thought it would be. They find that the line between what they would do and what they would not do, the line they assumed was drawn by their character, turns out to be drawn at least partly by the presence of other people watching. And that discovery is not comfortable, because it raises a question that is much harder than what would you do with an invisibility ring. It raises the question of whether you are actually good, or whether you are just well-behaved. Plato asked this question 2,400 years ago. He asked it through the voice of a character named Glaucon in the second book of the Republic. And the way he asked it was so precise, so psychologically devastating, so honest about the gap between how people present themselves and what actually motivates them, that it has survived intact for 2.5 millennia. Not because it has a comforting answer, because it does not have a comforting answer, because it forces you to look at something about human nature, and about your own nature specifically, that most people spend their entire lives carefully avoiding. The ring is called the Ring of Gyges, and what Plato did with it is one of the most important things anyone has ever done with a thought experiment. To understand why the Ring of Gyges matters, you need to understand the conversation it appears in. The Republic is Plato's longest and most ambitious dialogue. On the surface, it is about justice, about what justice is, whether it is real, whether it is worth having, and what a just society would actually look like. But underneath those questions, running through every argument and every image and every character in the text, is a much more personal question. Is it better to be just or unjust? Not better for society, better for you, for the person living the life. Is a just person actually better off than an unjust one, in any sense that actually matters to the experience of being alive? Glaucon is one of Socrates' interlocutors in the dialogue, and he is not satisfied with the answers he has heard so far. He pushes Socrates harder. He says, look, most people believe justice is a good thing, but most people also believe it is a burden, a constraint, a set of rules that we follow not because following them makes us genuinely better off, but because the alternative is worse. Because if everyone behaved unjustly, the social fabric would collapse and we would all suffer. Justice, in this view, is a compromise, a truce between people who would prefer to take whatever they want, but have learned that cooperation is less costly than constant conflict. And if that is what justice is, says Glaucon, then the question of whether to be just is really just a question of whether you can get away with being unjust. If the costs of injustice disappear, if the social consequences vanish, if no one can see you, and no one can punish you, and no one can judge you, then what reason do you have to be just? What is left? And to make this as sharp as possible, as impossible to deflect with comfortable abstractions, Glaucon tells the story of Gyges. Gyges was a shepherd in the service of the king of Lydia, an ordinary man, a man with no particular power, no particular status, no particular place in the world beyond his daily work among the flocks. One day there was an earthquake. The ground opened near where Gyges was tending his sheep, and he descended into the crack, curious. Inside he found a hollow bronze horse, and inside the horse was a corpse wearing a gold ring. Gyges took the ring. He went back to his fellow shepherds, and at some point, absent-mindedly or experimentally, he turned the setting of the ring toward his palm. And the people around him stopped talking about him, stopped referring to him, looked through him. He was there and he was not there. He was present and invisible at once. He turned the setting back. He appeared again. He tested it a second time, then a third. The ring worked. Every time. And then Glaucon tells you what Gyges did with this discovery. He used it to get himself appointed as a messenger to the king's court. He went to the palace. He seduced the queen. He conspired with her to murder the king. And then, invisible and untouchable and beyond all consequence, he took the kingdom for himself. That is the story. A man who was nobody, who had nothing, who discovered a way to act without consequence, and used it to take everything. And Glaucon's point is not that Gyges was a monster. His point is that Gyges was a person, and that what Gyges did is what any person would do. That if you gave the ring to someone considered completely virtuous and upright, and gave an identical ring to someone considered completely corrupt and shameless, within a short time there would be no difference between them. Because the behavior that looks like virtue, in most people most of the time, is not the expression of genuine inner goodness. It is the response to external pressure. Remove the pressure and the behavior changes. Every time. This is the argument Glaucon is making, and he wants Socrates to prove him wrong. Before we get to how Socrates responds, we need to sit with what Glaucon is actually claiming. Because it is not a fringe position. It is not a cynical exaggeration designed to make a rhetorical point. It is a description of human motivation that most people, if they are honest, recognize in themselves and in the world around them. Think about how people drive when they believe there are no speed cameras on a particular stretch of road. Think about how people treat service workers when they are confident there will be no social consequence. Think about how people behave in organizations when oversight disappears, when the boss is away, when the audit is not coming, when no one is keeping score. Think about how people behave online under anonymity. Think about what people say about others when they are certain those others will never hear it. The behaviors that emerge in the absence of observation are not always the behaviors of monsters. Sometimes they are small. Sometimes they are things most people would recognize as minor, but they are consistently different from the behaviors that emerge under observation. And that difference is the thing Glaucon is pointing at. We perform virtue. We perform justice. We perform goodness. And the performance is so consistent, so practiced, so deeply ingrained, that most of us have stopped noticing that it is a performance. We have confused the mask with the face. We have confused compliance with character. We have confused the absence of visible wrongdoing with the presence of genuine goodness. And the ring strips all of that away. That is its function as a thought experiment. It is not really about what you would do with magical invisibility. It is about what your behavior reveals about what actually governs your choices. If the removal of external consequences changes what you do, then your choices were never really yours. They were the choices of someone who was being watched. Now, here is where Plato takes this somewhere most people do not follow him. Because the obvious response to Glaucon's argument is to say, fine, maybe most people would misuse the ring. Maybe most people are only behaving well because of social pressure. But so what? The consequences are still real. The social fabric still matters. The fact that virtue is largely performance does not change the fact that the performance serves important functions. It keeps society functional. It keeps cooperation possible. It prevents the strong from simply devouring the weak. Maybe virtue does not need to be genuine to be valuable. Plato refuses this response. He refuses it not because he is naive about human nature, but because he thinks this response concedes something that cannot be conceded without destroying the possibility of a genuinely good life. Because if virtue is just performance, if justice is just the name we give to the behavior of people who are being watched, then the person living a so-called virtuous life is not actually better off than the person living an unjust life. They are just more constrained. They are wearing their cage more gracefully. And the moment the cage opens, the moment the ring appears, the moment observation disappears, there is nothing left to distinguish them from the person they were pretending not to be. Plato wants to argue that justice, real justice, genuine inner goodness, is not just instrumentally valuable, not just useful for maintaining social order. It is constitutively good. Good for the person who has it. Good in the way that health is good, not because of what it gets you, but because of what it is. And to make this argument, he has to do something very difficult. He has to show that there is a form of goodness that the ring cannot touch, a form of justice that does not depend on being seen, a form of character that does not require an audience. To understand Plato's answer, you need to understand what he believed was happening inside a person when they chose injustice. We have covered the tripartite soul on this channel before. The idea that your psyche is not a single unified thing, but a structure of three distinct parts with three distinct sets of desires and three distinct ways of relating to the world. The rational part, the part that reasons, that plans, that understands consequences and values truth above comfort. The part of you that can step back from your immediate desires and ask whether what you want is actually what is good for you. The spirited part, the part that houses your sense of honor, your pride, your anger, your ambition, the part that wants to be recognized, that cannot stand injustice done to it, that drives you to prove yourself and to defend what you love. And the appetitive part, the part that wants food, sex, money, comfort, pleasure, status. The part that does not care about the future or the truth or the good. the part that simply hungers and reaches and consumes. In a just person, in a person with genuine inner goodness, these three parts are in right relationship with each other. Reason governs. Spirit supports reason. Appetite is satisfied, but not in charge. There is a kind of inner order, an inner harmony that allows the person to act consistently, to mean what they say, to be the same person in private that they are in public. In an unjust person, this order has collapsed. The appetitive part has taken over, or the spirited part has broken free of reason and is running on resentment and wounded pride, or reason has been conscripted into the service of appetite, using its intelligence not to seek truth but to justify desire. The parts are at war with each other, and the person who appears from the outside to be powerful and free, the person with the ring, the person who takes what they want without consequence, is in fact living in a state of profound inner disorder. This is Plato's answer to Glaucon. The unjust person is not free. They are enslaved, not by other people, not by laws or consequences or the judgment of their peers, by their own appetites, by the parts of themselves that have no internal governor, by the endless hunger of a psyche that has given the wheel to the part of itself that can never be satisfied. And the just person, the person who would still behave the same way with the ring as without it, is not constrained. They are free, free in the only sense that matters, free from the tyranny of their own unordered desires, free to act from the deepest and most rational part of themselves, free to be the same person in every room, watched or unwatched, seen or unseen. And the just person, the person who would still behave the same way with the ring as without it, is not constrained. They are free, free in the only sense that matters, free from the tyranny of their own unordered desires, free to act from the deepest and most rational part of themselves, free to be the same person in every room, watched or unwatched, seen or unseen. But Plato goes further than this, because the argument about inner order and psychic harmony, as compelling as it is, still has a gap in it. It explains why chaos and disorder are bad for the person experiencing them. It does not fully explain why the person with genuine goodness is actively better off than the person who has simply learned to manage their appetites skillfully enough to get what they want without inner collapse. This is where the forms come back in. Plato believed that the just person is oriented towards something real, that justice is not just a social agreement or a psychological equilibrium. There is a form of justice, a real pattern, an actual structure in the fabric of reality. And the person who has genuine inner goodness is not just better organized psychologically. They are in contact with something true. Their soul is oriented toward the actual good rather than toward the copies and shadows of goods that appetite mistakes for the real thing. The unjust person, by contrast, is oriented toward shadows. They want money, but money is a shadow of real value. They want status, but status is a shadow of real worth. They want pleasure, but pleasure is a shadow of real happiness. And the tragedy of orienting your life around shadows is not just that the shadows are less real than the originals. It is that you can never get enough of them. Because what you are actually hungry for is the original, and no amount of shadow will satisfy that hunger. The appetites are bottomless, not because human beings are defective, but because they are asking the wrong things to fill a hunger that only truth and genuine goodness can satisfy. The ring, in this light, does not give you freedom. It gives you unlimited access to shadows. It removes all obstacles between you and the things your appetite mistakes for the good. And that is not liberation. That is the most exquisite form of imprisonment imaginable. Because now there is nothing left to stop you from discovering that none of it was what you were actually looking for. There is a character Plato introduces later in the Republic that is worth sitting with here. He calls it the tyrant. And the tyrant is not just a political figure. It is a psychological portrait. It is what a human being looks like when the Ring of Gyges has done its full work on them. The tyrant is the person who has obtained everything the ring makes available: power, wealth, the ability to act without consequence, the submission of other people to their will. And what Plato says about the tyrant is not that they are evil in a simple, clear, satisfying way. He says they are miserable, not outwardly, not in any way that would be visible to the person watching from outside, but inwardly, at the level of psychic experience. The tyrant is the most enslaved and the most wretched of all people. Because the tyrant's appetites have been fully unleashed. There is no restraint left, no inner governor, no part of the self that can say enough. And so, the tyrant is at the mercy of an endless procession of desires, each one demanding satisfaction, none of them capable of providing the peace that satisfaction seems to promise. The tyrant is afraid, not of other people, not in the usual way. They are afraid of their own inner life, because there is nothing in there but hunger and the temporary relief of feeding it and the knowledge that the hunger will return. And Plato says this: the tyrant is least free of all people, because the tyrant is ruled by the least rational, least stable, least satisfiable part of themselves. They have mistaken the absence of external constraint for freedom. But real freedom was never about the absence of external constraint. It was about the presence of inner order, and inner order is the one thing the ring cannot give you. You can take the ring off a just person, and they are still just. You can give the ring to a tyrant, and they are still enslaved. The ring reveals character. It does not create it, and it does not destroy it. It only removes the noise so that what was always there becomes visible. Now, here is the part of this that is hardest to sit with. Because everything we have covered so far has been about the extremes. The person of genuine justice and the tyrant at the other end of the spectrum. And most people are neither of those things. Most people are somewhere in the middle. Mostly well-behaved, mostly decent. Capable of genuine kindness and genuine pettiness in roughly equal measure, depending on the day and the circumstances and who is watching. And Plato's question, aimed at that ordinary middle space, is this: what is actually governing your choices? Not in the moments of obvious moral crisis, not in the moments where the stakes are high and the right action is clear and the cost of doing it is manageable. In the small moments. In the moments where no one would ever know. In the moments where the cost of doing the right thing is real and the benefit is invisible and there is no audience and no applause and no social reward waiting on the other side. What governs you there? Because that is where character actually lives. Not in the performance, in the residue, in what remains when the observation disappears and the social pressure lifts and you are left alone with your own choices. Most people, if they are honest, find that the answer is not entirely comfortable. Most people find that the line is blurrier than they thought, that there are things they tell themselves about their own goodness that do not fully survive contact with the reality of how they actually behave when no one is watching. And that discovery is not a verdict. It is not a reason for despair. It is information. It is the beginning of something if you are willing to let it be. Plato believed that the examined life was the only life worth living. He believed that the most important work a human being can do is to look honestly at what is actually happening inside them, not the story they tell about themselves, not the version of their character that they present to other people, the actual structure of their inner life, what is actually in charge, what they are actually oriented toward, what they would actually do with the ring. And that examination is not comfortable. It is not supposed to be comfortable, because the thing it is trying to dislodge is not a small thing. It is the entire architecture of self-deception that most people build over a lifetime and call a personality. The Ring of Gyges is a tool for that examination. Not a real tool, a philosophical one. A thought experiment designed not to give you a scenario to plan for, but to reveal something about yourself that you might not have seen otherwise. Something about the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are when the observation disappears. And what you do with that revelation is the most important thing Plato leaves you with, because there are two responses to finding the gap. The first is to close it by lowering the standard, to say, well, nobody is really purely good. It is all just performance and social pressure, and there is no such thing as genuine virtue, so the gap does not mean what I thought it meant. This response is comfortable, and it is wrong. It uses the existence of the gap to justify making the gap permanent. The second response is to take the gap seriously, to ask what it would take to close it in the other direction, to move toward a state where the behavior with the ring and the behavior without the ring are the same, not because the ring no longer makes unjust action possible, but because something inside you has genuinely changed, because the parts of you are in better order, because you are oriented toward something real rather than toward the shadows that appetite mistakes for the real thing, because you have done enough inner work that the absence of observation no longer changes who you are. That is what Plato means by justice. Not compliance, not performance, not the absence of visible wrongdoing, the presence of genuine inner order, the presence of a self that is the same in every room. There is a reason this question has never stopped being relevant. There is a reason the Ring of Gyges shows up in philosophy courses and ethics seminars and late-night conversations between people who are being honest about what they actually believe about human nature. It is because the ring is not a fantasy. The ring exists. Not in the literal form Gyges found in the bronze horse, but in 1,000 forms that modern life provides. Anonymity online is a ring. Financial power that puts you above accountability is a ring. Positions of authority that no one can challenge are a ring. Relationships where one person holds all the power and the other has no recourse are a ring. Any situation where the normal costs of unjust behavior have been removed or suspended is a ring? And the question Plato asks does not change when the ring takes a different form. It is still the same question. What governs you when observation disappears? What are you actually made of underneath the performance? And the answer, whatever it is not fixed. That is the one thing Plato is most insistent about. Character is not destiny in the sense of being immutable. The soul can be reordered. The parts can be brought back into right relationship. The orientation can be shifted from shadow toward the real. It requires work. It requires honesty. It requires exactly the kind of examination that most people spend their lives avoiding because it is easier to manage the performance than to change the person giving it. But it is possible. That is the claim. Not that human beings are naturally good. Not that goodness is easy or default or guaranteed. But that genuine inner goodness is possible. That the gap between who you are when you are watched and who you are when you are not is not a fixed fact about human nature. It is a measure of how much inner work remains to be done. So take the ring off your finger for a moment. Put it down on the table in front of you and look at what it revealed. Not with judgment, not with the part of you that is already constructing the self-defense, with honesty, with the part of you that actually wants to know. What would you do? What did you feel the pull toward? In those first few seconds before your mind started editing the answer into something more presentable, what does that pull tell you about what is actually governing your choices? What does it tell you about the gap between the person you present and the person you are? And then ask the harder question. Not what does this reveal about my current state, but what would it take to close the gap? What would it mean to be a person whose answer to the ring question is genuinely, not performatively, the same as your answer under observation? What would it mean to be a person the ring cannot change? Not because you have suppressed your desires, because you have ordered them, because reason is actually governing, because you are actually oriented towards something real, because that person, Plato says, is not just a better citizen, or a more reliable friend, or a more trustworthy partner. That person is genuinely free. Free in the only way that actually matters. Free from the inside out. Free, not because no one is watching, but because the watching was never the point. The ring does not corrupt good people. It reveals them. The question is what you want it to reveal about you.